Good morning, and thank you for joining us in our event series of Virtual Viewpoints, where we come together to learn about issues facing women and families. I'm Lisa De La Garza, Vice President of Programs with Texas Women's Foundation, and part of my role here at the Foundation includes overseeing the advocacy efforts, and I'm excited to share with you today our advocacy agenda for the 87th Texas legislative session and how we can mobilize our networks to drive positive social and economic change. For this Viewpoints, we brought together advocacy leaders who work to create policy change on behalf of women and girls across Texas in the areas of housing and student debt. But first, I'd like to share with you how Texas Women's Foundation engages in advocacy, how we developed our advocacy agenda, and then of course, share our focus areas. Texas Women's Foundation advocates for policies and practices in local communities and at the state level where innovation and investment can help empower women, lead to positive economic and social change, and achieve equity for Texas women, girls, and their families. Advocacy activities focus on 3 areas that are led by our advocacy committee, and they include awarding grants to community agencies for lobbying, for conducting research and education, and to support alliances or coalitions. We also encourage action by board members, supporters, and the broader community via social media, hosting forums, and direct calls to action through our Army of Advocates. We also provide written and in-person testimony on key topics at various levels of governments. As advocates, we produce and we share research on key issues impacting women, girls, and their families. We highlight programs and innovative solutions that can be scaled across the state. We provide lawmakers and decision makers with timely and targeted information in order to shape policies relating to women and girls. And we bring together partners from local communities across the state and beyond to engage and mobilize around priority issues, initiatives, and programs. There's a few steps that we take to get to our advocacy platform, and one of them involves our statewide research. Since 2014, the Texas Women's Foundation has been focusing on 4 key issues or pillars that are woven into the fabric of economic security for women, girls, and their families. This report is called Economic Issues for Women in Texas, and the study examines both policies and practices at the state level while identifying areas where innovation and investment can help strengthen women and their families. We released our 3rd edition of this report in June of last year, and you can read and download the full report at TXWF.ecoissues.org. So here you'll see the 4 pillars that are highlighted in the full report. Each section of the report provides data and statistics about the status of women in Texas and also includes some key takeaways and policy recommendations. It was from this report that we developed our advocacy platform that focuses on the economic security for women and their families. In healthcare, we will support legislation or other actions that increase continuity of care for women and eliminate financial and geographic barriers to healthcare, while ensuring that funding for care meets the needs of Texas women. Examples of possible action include increasing postpartum eligibility for Medicaid from 60 days to 12 months to help address high levels of maternal mortality here in Texas. This was the biggest issue left over from 2019, and we know that there is a cost here, but the issues of racial disparities have been made even clearer over this past year that there's hope that something will pass. We'll also look to support leave policies to ensure women do not have to choose between their wages and their health or the health of their children and their families. In housing, we will support legislation or other actions on eviction prevention services, landlord mediation, and elevated needs caused by the pandemic, as well as ongoing housing concerns. We'll also support access to affordable and stable housing for low-income women and families as a foundation for economic security. Examples of possible action in this area include prioritizing transitional housing for domestic violence survivors, improved tenant protections and tenant bill of rights, and in legal and mediation services for women and families facing eviction. With gender discrimination, Texas Women's Foundation will oppose bills that would seek to discriminate on any person based on their gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, or gender expression. We will support bills that would extend non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people in employment, in housing, and public accommodations. With predatory lending and student debt, we will support legislation or other actions to maintain and improve protections for payday title lending borrowers, as well as consumer and identity protections for survivors of domestic violence. We'll also look to support legislation and actions around student debt forgiveness. Examples of possible action in this area include federal rules, state legislation, or local ordinances that provide stronger predatory lending protections, and actions that make college and higher education more affordable through increased financial aid through the Texas Grant Program and Promise programs. In the area of childcare and after school as a work support for women, we will support bills that impact the affordability or accessibility of quality early childhood education. We will also look to support leave policies such as paid sick leave on the state, local, and private employer levels. Examples of possible action include requiring subsidy providers to participate in the Texas Rising Star program with a clear phase-in of requirements and support systems, and also build upon school finance reforms of 2019 to fund full-day pre-K programs and other levels of early education. Another way that we also advance our advocacy engagement and where you can get involved is through our Army of Advocates, calls to action. In early 2019, the foundation began sending out monthly Army of Advocates calls to action. Some examples include providing information about getting registered to vote and inviting others to do the same, sharing the importance of completing the census, or encouraging our advocates to contact their representatives about issues that they are passionate about. So if you haven't already done so, I encourage you to sign up for our Army of Advocates on our website to receive the most up-to-date information on actions you can take easily and physically distanced to support women and families in Texas. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for this informative panel, Holly Reed, who will lead us in a discussion with two of our advocacy grantees and community partners in the areas of housing and student debt. Holly currently serves as the principal and practice leader of U.S. Advocacy with Ryan LLC, a global tax services software and technology firm. In her role, she's responsible for leading the advocacy practice to represent the interests of Ryan and its clients at all levels of government, and leads and manages a nationwide team of service delivery advocates, attorneys, and internal and third-party lobbyists. Among her many professional affiliations, Holly also serves on the Texas Women's Foundation Board of Directors. She's a member of our Advocacy Committee and a member of Texas Women's Foundation Executive Leadership Council. Holly, thank you for joining us today and leading us in this important conversation, and I'll pass it on to you.
Great, thanks, Lisa. It is an exciting time in advocacy because every other year for 140 days, we have a tremendous opportunity to make improvements on the state of our state. And today we're very lucky to be able to dive into a couple of the pillars that Lisa talked about and how the Women's Foundation and some of our partners are doing exactly that. The pillars of education and housing. And so without further ado, let me introduce our esteemed guests, and I'll go in alphabetical order. And I'll start with Aurora Harris. And Aurora is the Southern Regional Director for Young Invincibles. It's a national nonpartisan policy research and advocacy organization that's committed to amplifying the voices of young adults and expanding their economic opportunity, getting them off to the right start. She's based in Houston and leads the strategic direction, programming, and policy priorities on healthcare, higher ed, workforce, finances, civic engagement for the entire region. She's got extensive community organizing experience and has really been focused on formalizing collaborative partnerships, increasing diversity on boards, with volunteers and clients. She received her BA in English and African American Studies from the College of Charleston. And then Christina Rosales is also joining us. And Christina is the Deputy Director of Texas Housers. Originally from Laredo, Christina is a native Tejana with a deep belief that communities impacted by injustice should be at the center of shaping housing policy and social change. She previously worked as a social services and breaking news reporter, so dealing with the media is nothing new to her. And she's also been a program assistant at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. She's got a Bachelor of Science in Journalism from Northwestern University and a Master's of Social Work from the University of Chicago. So thank you, ladies, for being with us today and speaking with us and also giving us some insight into what you do and how you do it. We're very thankful that you've joined us, and we're proud that the Women's Foundation can play a role to support the work that you do. So let's dive in and talk a little bit about the work that you do every single day. So with that, maybe I'll start with Christina and then go to Aurora. Can you give us just a few minutes and explain exactly what your organization does?
Yeah, so I'd like to start by saying that I love the Texas Women's Foundation description of housing as an anchor, because where we come from, where we live is the anchor for everything that we are. And that's why it's such an important advocacy part of your strategy. But Texas Housers takes that responsibility very seriously. And so we're a statewide housing justice organization, and we have a staff of researchers and organizers, community planners, attorneys, and we work in low-income, low-resourced communities of color, mainly, to support residents' vision for decent, safe neighborhoods and housing opportunity. We work with residents to understand the historical context for inequality. We help them develop the skills they need to become effective advocates, to use their voice and their vision in policy discussions. We also want them to build their power. Typically what we've seen is that a lot of communities where we're working, people have lost faith in government, that government will listen to them. But when you put their housing, their neighborhood at the center of their advocacy, they are super motivated to get out there and make a change for the better. So we're using policy and community housing policy and community development policy as a vehicle for civic engagement, helping people build power and these people have historically been neglected and even silenced by their government. We also use civil rights as a key tool. And we think of housing policy as just, housing policy, but really when we talk about fair housing, that is it's a civil right to not be discriminated against, to not face segregation. And so we are also educating people about how fair housing is a civil right, and it's a civil right that's really made personal. So when we get people on board, they're like, yeah, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to fight for our communities because it's our civil right. So
great. There's nothing more personal than having a safe place to lay your head every night.
Right.
Thank you, Christina. And Aurora, tell us a little bit more about what you guys do every single day.
Yeah. I'm so grateful to be here and grateful for the Women's Foundation support, and love that you all included higher education and student debt in your report and advocacy. We know women are bearing the brunt of the student debt crisis and carry the most student debt. And so it's really I'm just so grateful to be here today. At Young Invincibles, our vision is that all young people participate fully in the political process and have access to the things that they need to economically thrive. And so we do a lot of work around policy and making sure young people are at the table. We help legislators think of policies or rethink existing policies that can better serve young people in our issue areas, which is higher education, healthcare, and workforce. We also do a lot of research. So similar to the report that was mentioned earlier, we also produce reports. We just produced a report around student debt in Texas and how it's impacting borrowers of color in our state. And so we kind of use research to eliminate what's happening with young people economically in Texas. We also do a lot of work around consumer education. So we do a lot of education, outreach, and training to young people around consumer products. So things like health insurance, how do you access it? How do you use it? How do you pay back your student loans? So we do a lot of work around educating young people around financial tools that we know will help them make them more secure and be able to navigate these processes better. And then last but not least, we build a lot of power with young people. So similar to Christina, we want to engage as many young people as we can in the political process, in the things that are going on around them. And so we have our Young Advocates program, which is a paid leadership development program where we train young organizers at college campuses across the state to better engage in their communities and work with us during session and off session to really lift up youth voice. So that's pretty much what we do. And we're very, very busy because of session right now. So it's a really exciting time despite everything that's going on.
Yes, well, I think everybody can see why these are two of the organizations that the foundation has supported, and you guys are doing incredible work every single day. And you both talked a lot about how closely you work with your populations. So tell us a little bit more about exactly in the weeds of how you do that and how you engage with them and how you work with them to change policy. Aurora, we'll go back to you and then to Christina.
Yeah. I think a really good example of how we work with young people across the state is through our participatory action research. And so basically what that means is we produce reports alongside the people that are most impacted. And so when we did our report that we just recently came out with, it's called Student Debt in Texas, Collecting on the Best Interests of Texas Borrowers. We did workshops with borrowers of color across the state, 200 borrowers to be exact, and then we did a 1,600 member survey to really get a good understanding of what was happening. And then once we kind of produce our recommendations, we go back to the people that we did our workshops with and our surveys with and kind of workshop even the recommendations and say, is this really resonating with you? Is this what the state needs to be doing? And we engage young people throughout that entire process. And so really we work every day with young people who are struggling to pay back their loans, who are struggling to make ends meet, who really have student debt as a very big burden in their lives. I think 65% of the folks that we surveyed and talked to across the state said that student loans are presenting a serious obstacle for them in owning a home and going back and pursuing their education. It's really disproportionately impacting Black and Latinx borrowers, and particularly Black and Latinx women in our state. And so we've learned a lot through engaging young people with that report. In addition to the research side of things, we also have our Young Advocates program, and we have a youth advisory board that kind of gives us that stamp of approval on all of our decisions as well. But for the most part, we work with a lot of young people through our research work, and we found out a lot about what's been impacting them through that.
That's great. It is very difficult sometimes to get people to actually engage in the process. So yeah. We applaud you, especially in the younger community, for mobilizing those guys.
Absolutely.
Christina, how about you? What are some of the brass tacks you guys use to get your folks engaged?
Yeah, we have offices all over the state. Small. Well, we did before pandemic life. Everyone's kind of working from their home, but for the most part, we try to stay. We try to stay local in some ways, even though we're a statewide organization. So we have an office in Houston. We have folks in San Antonio, and we have someone in Dallas, Fort Worth. And we've also worked in Lubbock and Amarillo and the Rio Grande Valley. And really what we've done for the last 30 years is we work with organized groups of people, people who have that organizing support, and we provide them with what they need to be effective advocates. So it's like they have the people power sometimes, but really we bring in our policy expertise. We like to say sometimes, a lot of cities and developers, they have McKinsey or Deloitte to help them consult on policies and plan, community plans. Well, community residents where we work, they have us. So we help them, make their vision a reality on paper. We conduct research. They ask us about, what are the HUD regulations about, tenant organizing, or what are the HUD regulations about what we're entitled to? What are our rights as HUD tenants? How can you help us?
Great. Well, we all will play a part in hopefully getting us there. So let's dive in a little bit deeper into the specific issues that you guys work on every day. So Christina, we'll start with you. Talk a little bit, I mean, housing instability is a critical issue for anybody who is facing that. Specifically for Texas women, talk a little bit about how that is impacting us.
Yeah, the women in Texas and just across the country are more likely to be the single head of household. They're more likely to, in other words, women are more likely to be single parents with kids trying to make it all work. And so that leaves them with less income often and greater responsibility in taking care of the family. Researcher Matthew Desmond, who wrote the book everyone has been talking about for the last few years, Evicted, he found that women with children, and especially Black women with children, are especially susceptible to eviction. So I'll give you some data on that. We found that 1 in 5 Black women face an eviction at some point in their life. 1 in 15 white women face an eviction at some point in their lifetime. You know, I think it's important to understand that if women are paid less, you know, these are all systemic issues. If women are paid less in our workforce, if they're more likely to have to take time off to take care of family, to take care of kids, you know, to have a baby, they're less likely to have the income that they need to stay stable. So that means that there's less money able to go to housing. And then you add in that a lot of apartments, even though it is illegal, a lot of apartments, we've heard, discriminate based on family status. You know, a lot of landlords might say, well, we really don't want to rent to a family with children. So that leaves, you know, women with children trying to find a decent place to live. And I think that's just too big of a burden to put on women in Texas. And so so what I think we have to remember is that women, you know, housing is an anchor for everybody, but really a lot of the times women are the anchor for our communities, and we have to support them, and that starts with housing.
Yeah. Well, and you make a great point, Christina. It's all connected, and when we think about how that's connected with the financial side of things, with student debt, you know, access, affordability, accountability, that's the root causes and root issues for many of these things. So, Aurora, maybe talk about how do we address these 3 things at the state level?
Yeah, sure. And I see Dina had a great question in the chat too that kind of piggybacks on this. Nationwide, I think we're at 1.8 trillion in student debt, and then Texas holds 144 billion of Texans hold that amount of student loan debt, and it is a huge nationwide issue. But there's a number of things that the state of Texas has done to kind of fuel the crisis, and then as a result can do to help remedy some of the disinvestment that we've done over the past decade. On the affordability, on the access side, I was talking about earlier, how do we make sure that we center equity and have access to today's student? There's a number of great bills that Young Invincibles will be supporting around access. One of them is an incredible tuition assistance bill for adult learners. So women who want to go back, who are over the age of 25, really great bill that would allow some tuition assistance for that. There's also a great bill around making sure that there's no tuition for students who are former foster youth or women who are experiencing homelessness. Young Invincibles is helping to usher in a really great bill around campus mental health, because we know that you can have access to something, but once you're there, you need the supports to stay. And mental health has come up so much when we've been talking to students and borrowers over the past year, especially with the pandemic. And so trying to get an understanding of
I think we might have. a little jitter problem with Aurora. Well, we'll come. She answered that question spectacularly, and we'll come back and hopefully she'll have a. We are going to talk about broadband on this call, but obviously that's a key component of education and everything else that's going on during this time. So and for those of you that are watching, please do put your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. And we will also be going over some specific bill numbers. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We were applauding your answer, although it did get cut off just a smidge. So let's go to Christina with the next question. You know, you mentioned the imbalance of power between renters and the property owners. So one of the goals is to get more ability for renters to be able to do what they need to do and to impact on those policies. How did that happen? How did we get here? And then what can we do about that? And this might be a great place to talk about the Tenant Protection Act or the Tenant Bill of Rights.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a storyteller by nature and just also my professional life. So I want to kind of give you a causal story about how we got here. And I want to start with that dominant narrative. You know, this country is very rooted in property ownership. You know, it goes back to our who gets to vote and who has a say and who has power. But I also want to bring it back a little bit more to modern times, and the Realtors Association over history has done a brilliant marketing job. You know, when you say the American dream, I mean, what do you see? It's a house with a picket fence, and that's how you know you've arrived, right? Housing is seen as a vehicle for wealth generation. It drives, you know, it drives families to save and to have this like little savings account. It's where a lot of our wealth is rooted, is in our housing. But if you're a renter, that's not the case. When you think about if housing is a vehicle for wealth and a vehicle for profit, people protect it fiercely. So it's understandable that people want to protect their life savings, their wealth generation vehicle, but it leaves the idea in our heads subconsciously, I hope, that property and profit are more valuable than people. And so that's why we see, you know, the property owners, apartment owners have their lobby to protect their interests. Meanwhile, tenants, you know, we're all renters at some point, and the way it kind of goes in our head is that, well, we're all renters at some point, and at some point you're going to buy your property and then you have your say. But I don't think that's acceptable when you think about what our cities look like. Most of our cities now, our big cities anyway, are half renters. And it's harder, you know, Aurora has talked about how student loan burdens are keeping young people from buying their home. And so it's not okay for us to think that, you know, one day you'll have your say once you own your own property. I think what we hope will happen is that over time, maybe this session, maybe over the next coming sessions, that we will see tenants as worthy and worthy of inherent dignity. And one of the ways that I think this is important is the Tenant Bill of Rights or Tenant Protection Act. And that's HB 4039, and it's filed by Representative Armando Wally out of Houston. You know, the landlord-tenant relationship is such that the customer is always wrong. And that's, you know, that's sort of the way it is. A tenant signs their lease and they're signing away so many of their rights to privacy and to being treated with dignity. But the Tenant Bill of Rights kind of starts to get at it starts to get at that issue and tries to level the playing field a little bit between the landlord and the tenant. So I'm going to explain a few wonky things, but generally, it reforms the notice to vacate process, which is the first step in an eviction. People get a notice to vacate and they automatically think, I gotta go. but they have a right to stay in their home, and they need knowledge. They need to know that. And so it's we hope that this bill can reform that process. It lets tenants know about maybe the apartment is in a floodplain, maybe it's flooded before. Tenants have a right to know that, just the way homeowners already have that right. It protects tenants' privacy, so landlords can't just show up whenever they want it to a tenant's home unless it's an emergency. It protects tenants' privacy. Landlords have to give notice. It would ban lockouts. Over this pandemic, we've seen landlords get tired of tenants and lock them out. It would ban that process. And it would protect tenants from predatory late fees and fines. Texas has some of the highest late fees in the country, y'all, and there's also nothing stopping from landlords applying a tenant's rent payment to late fees first. So those late fees compound and compound, and then you've got late fees on late fees. Yep. This bill would reform that. So it has a number of other protections. It's a whopping 38-page bill, and we congratulate Representative Wally on putting that together, and we are very excited about it.
Right. Yes, I'm familiar with many of those issues, and if not handled properly, then you get into a spiral that they just can't get out of. Yeah. Okay, so Aurora, talk to us a little bit about student debt and how that's impacting the lives of young women. And I know there's a lot of conversation around canceling student debt. So what would the implications of that be? And then how do you frame this as an equity issue? I know that's a lot. That's kind of a lot in one nugget there.
No.
But I know you're answering those together.
Yeah, no, and I can answer it really briefly by saying that student debt is definitely a racial justice issue. Similar to kind of I'm hearing some threads with what Christina's saying, how housing can be an anchor of wealth. We know that higher education also is a really big indicator of economic wealth. I think 65% of jobs right now will require some form of post-secondary education. And so higher education more and more is becoming a requirement in order to be able to compete, right, in the economy. And then in addition to that, what we found was that Latinx women in particular were really being impacted by student debt here in Texas, and there was a huge barrier for them returning to school. And also that similar to across the country, student debt is just really impacting Black and Brown communities more, as because they don't have the wealth to be able to kind of go to college debt-free in the first place. So they ended up having to borrow more, borrow riskier, doing like private things, putting things on credit cards, and then they end up being in a situation where they can't pay their loans back due to systemic barriers, racial and gender discrimination in the workplace, not being paid as much, right? And so now they're more likely to default on those loans that they had to take out in the first place. So we really see it as a racial justice issue. We will be calling on the Biden administration and Congress to abolish student debt up to $50,000. We don't think $10,000 is enough. And then in the meantime, in between time, at the state level, we're really calling on the state to pass our borrower bill of rights. So similar to Christina's tenant bill of rights, we have a borrower bill of rights. We know that students and borrowers of color are defaulting at alarming rates on their loans and shouldn't be. There's many processes and systems in place so that you can get into low-income repayment plans. And we feel like students just aren't receiving that information. And so our borrower bill of rights would really help support loan servicer companies and making sure that students are being put into the correct plans, not being pushed into default, and really acting on the best interests of the borrowers in our state. And so on the federal level, we're calling on Biden and Congress to abolish student debt up to $50,000. And then here in Texas, we really want the Borrower Bill of Rights passed. And I put the bill number for that. It's being supported by Senator Powell's office, and we're really excited about it.
Great. Excellent. Well, and you've both touched on this, but I want to give you a chance to elaborate a little bit further. Disparities between your white constituents and women of color. I mean, we've all recognized that those barriers and those challenges are different in many instances. So what types of policies are you guys working on and recommending to try to focus on those communities in those categories that have the most need? And Christina, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Aurora.
Yeah, and I can talk about this more when we give people some action items, but one of the things that's really important to us and our partner, we have, partners all around the state who believe that people with vouchers should not be discriminated against. A lot of the times, people with housing choice vouchers, that's that federal subsidy that a tenant can go and take to any private apartment and rent an apartment, and that's kind of a golden ticket, because 1 in 4 people who qualifies for this voucher actually gets it, and the voucher holders are disproportionately women of color with children, and there's nothing stopping a landlord from saying, I just don't want to take your voucher. I don't want you here. We think that that's a problem, and it mostly impacts people of color. So right now in the state legislature, there is an effort to ban voucher discrimination. People call it source of income discrimination, but one of my colleagues, Demetria McCain of the Inclusive Communities Project, says it's not source of income discrimination, it's voucher discrimination. So let's be clear about that. So Senate Bill 265, filed by Senator Royce West, and then HB 1470 is the companion in the House, filed by Representative Rodriguez in Austin. And this would make source of income or voucher holders part of a protected class under the Texas Fair Housing Act. So the Texas Fair Housing Act protects people based on race, age, family status, disability, national origin. So this would just be another protected class under the Texas Fair Housing Act. It's a smart thing to do for Texas to include this. We're a lot of voucher holders who have these golden tickets. They have to turn them right back in after 69 or 90 days if they can't find someone to accept it. And we know just in Dallas, Fort Worth, my colleague Demetria McCain's organization conducted a study, and the vast majority of landlords won't accept vouchers in DFW. It's something like 7% in the survey accepted them. So that's one thing. I can talk more about other bills, but that's a big one for us this session.
Great. And Aurora, how do you guys see the policies that you can recommend to close those disparities?
Yeah, I think, thank you so much for answering this question. So the average debt in Texas is $29,000, just to give a little context. And then Latinx borrowers borrow about $500 more, and then Black borrowers borrow $7,000 more. And again, this is due to the racial wealth gap that I was kind of mentioning earlier. I think a big piece of legislation that we are really excited about is SB 1019. And this is introduced by Senator Zaffrini. And basically what it would do, it would have the Higher Education Coordinating Board produce an annual report on student debt data, but it would aggregate that data. I know I'm getting excited because we love data, Wong, so I hope all the people on this call love data, but it would disaggregate the student debt that Texans hold by race, gender, ethnicity, their degree, enrollment status, and whether or not they graduated. And so the wonderful thing about this, right, is it would allow us to have some equity targets, right, to really see, okay, where are the real pain points here, and be able to design policies and practices in our larger kind of 60 by 30 plan to really get at those. And so we're really excited, ooh, please tell us, at the state level, count how many Black and Latinx women and women in general, are holding this debt, and what are those targeted approaches we can then do once we have that data. So that's something we're really, really excited about.
Great, excellent. So now we're gonna go into a little maybe lightning round of a couple of questions. So if you're in the audience, this is the time when you might want to grab your pen, because I'm going to ask these panelists some very specific questions about actions and bills. And so if you want to catch some of these bill numbers and authors and action items, now's the time to grab a piece of paper and a pen. And we'll try to also catch some of the questions that have been in the chat as a result of this. So, all right, lightning round question number 1. And we'll start with Aurora. The question is, what are your top pieces of legislation that you want to make sure get passed, and what bills are you wanting to make sure don't pass? So, Aurora, you're up first.
Yes. Okay. Championing our Student Borrower Bill of Rights, and that's SB 1859, and I'll drop these in the chat. This is going to set standards for loan servicers in our state and make sure that borrowers are being looked out for and they're put into the appropriate repayment plan so that they don't default when our federal kind of pause on student loans expires. And then SB 1019, the one I just talked about, which would produce the data and disaggregate it by race and gender. So we can really have, the state can really be collecting like gender data on student loan and like create some targeted approaches. And then the bill that needs to like get crushed is HB 1486. And this is the End In-State Tuition for Illegals Act. It's very problematic bill, to say the least. And just for a little context, so in 2001, Texas became the first state to extend in-state tuition for students who are not US citizens. And so this bill would end that. And so this would really impact, you know, our DACA students, our Dreamer students in our state, and have them having enormous, you know, tuition bills that they really can't afford. So we really need to crush that bill. And I'll put all these in the chat for you guys too.
Great. Christina, what needs to pass and what needs to die?
Yeah, HB 4039, that's the Tenant Protection Act or Tenant Bill of Rights. If we can get y'all to call your representatives and you know, we want that to pass. It also has a number of provisions within it, but they're also separate bills. So so maybe there's more of a chance for the other ones if this one doesn't pass, but there's HB 531, and that's filed by Representative Wally as well. And it's a flood disclosure that I mentioned earlier. So lets tenants know about flood risk in apartments they rent. And then Senate Bill 265 and HB 1470. Those are the anti-voucher discrimination bills. And then one that I'm also really excited about and is also included in the Tenant Bill of Rights is HB 1647, and that's also championed by Representative Wally. So, you know, when someone is evicted, that even if they win their eviction case, even if they got their case dismissed, they worked it out with their landlord, that eviction stays on their record for 7 years. And 9 out of 10 landlords screen for evictions.
Sure.
And they get automatic reports about a yay or nay on a tenant even. So this bill would seal those records for tenants who win their case or get it dismissed, so that they have a fair chance at seeking, at finding decent housing. So that's HB 1647, and we're pretty excited about that. And it has a Senate bill that's similar, not exactly the same, but similar, and that's SB 558, filed by Senator Zaffirini. I don't have a bill that that we need to crush, and that's a good thing because we could focus our efforts on this other stuff, thank God. But I do feel the pandemic has changed the way we're talking about housing. So the bills that we normally see that we need to crush every session, they're kind of laying low. The people who file those bills are laying low. So I think now is our chance, and we feel the urgency to this session.
Great, great. So we've gotten several questions about actual activation. So lightning round question number 2 is, you've got some incredible people on the line here that are believers in what you're doing and how you're doing it. Give them an assignment, give them an action, and also let them know, you know, one of the questions in the chat was from Teresa Flores, do you have a lobby day? You know, tell them where and when to show up and how. Christina, we'll start with you.
You know, we don't have a lobby day this session. Oops, somebody muted me. We don't have a lobby day this session. We hope to have one next session in person, and we can you know, go to the Capitol and tell them what's what. But we do encourage folks to, and we can send you know, the people on the committees so that y'all can call committees and ask for hearings on some of these bills that haven't gotten hearings yet.
Awesome. I love that question. And I agree, there's a lot of power in the Zoom right now. We have a student debt advocacy toolkit because we know student debt can be like an icky thing to talk about and do advocacy on, and I'm gonna pop it in the chat right now. And then we also have an advocacy day called Advocates Take Austin, and that is gonna be April 19th to the 23rd, and I'm also gonna drop the link to the invite for that as well. And I would love to see all of you there.
Great. Looking through the questions, what was the name of the report about the landlords not accepting vouchers, and where can we access the data Aurora was mentioning? So
the Inclusive Communities Project. So they have a website. I think it's just inclusivecommunities.net. They have their report on there about the survey of voucher holders in DFW. You can find it there.
Yep, and we have it's really long, y'all, but if you read the wonderful Women's Foundation report, you can read this. I believe in you. We have a 50-page report on student debt in Texas, and I will drop the link to that as well. That's where all the data that I mentioned came from.
Great. Let's see. It looks like we may have answered most of these questions that I see over here. So I guess I would say, just kind of in wrapping up, ladies, thank you for what you're doing. Again, we're very, very proud of the fact that the Women's Foundation is able to support your activities, and we'll be following it closely. You have an army behind you, and we look forward to being supportive, and we please look in the chat, and I'm sure that Lisa will be sending some more information out to everybody about the details of the bills that were specifically mentioned, and we'll be monitoring those and keeping everybody posted on the movement as it goes forwards. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to the day when we can all be in person.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. We are so grateful to the Texas Women's Foundation. So
absolutely, and so grateful to everyone who's going to be tracking and helping us with these bills. We cannot do it without the people power on this call, so we really appreciate it.
Thanks. Roz, off to you.
I had to pop in just before you ladies left to say this has just been brilliant, wonderful. Christina, Aurora, I thank you so much for the work you're doing. It's a joy and a privilege to be your partner. And Holly, as always, you are magnificent, my friend. Thank you. But no, this has just been so meaningful, and it is the perfect example of why, collectively, we can get the job done. We have to get the job done. So we will count on everybody that's on the call today to know that they are picking up the gauntlet. They are now part of the Army of Advocates if they weren't already, and we're counting on them. And so thank you all so much for joining us. I want to have a couple of quick things that I'll close with, and one is to say, if you're ever looking for us, it's very simple. We're easy to find at TXWF.org. So please come on to the website and take a look at the ways you can support the work that we are doing across the state of Texas. We'd love to have you sign up as a member of our Army of Advocates. Of course, we would love to have your donations and your financial support to go to women and girls across the state, and would love to also invite you on April 29th to attend our Leadership Forum and Awards celebration. It'll start at 10 in the morning, and it will conclude at 11:45. And it is going to be a tremendous celebration of 7 extraordinary women leaders who are changing pathways of possibility for women and girls in Texas. You can find out more about that at txwfleadership.org. And today, again, to Aurora, Christina, Holly, and all of those of you who were here today, let's go get it done. Thank you, and bye.